when the 13 colonies were pushed to the point of smashing ships and dumping tea into the sea. Who could have imagined that this would overturn the rule of the British Empire? In the 17th century, as several settlements were established, the Spanish eventually settled on the Florida Peninsula and began exploring the southwestern part of North America. The French expanded their influence southward from the north, bringing large areas of what is now the central United States into the territory of New France. The British, meanwhile, successfully consolidated their control over the coastal regions of North America and established the famous 13 colonies there. These 13 colonies were later divided into 3 regions: the New England colonies, the Middle colonies, and the Southern colonies. As overseas possessions of Britain, these colonies were administered by the British government, but they all enjoyed a certain degree of autonomy and allowed white men to participate in elections. In some areas, however, Jews and Catholics were excluded. Although Britain restricted these colonies from trading with other European powers, the British colonies in North America still found profitable trading partners among other British colonies. As European powers established colonies in North America, large numbers of black slaves were transported there through the transatlantic slave trade. Thanks to a suitable climate and fertile soil, an agriculture-based mercantilist economy flourished. This economic model centered on a single crop plantation system, relying on large plantations and enslaved labor to export agricultural products. The main cash crops at the time included tobacco. These crops were exported in exchange for other imported goods. The scale of slavery in the southern colonies far exceeded that of the other British North American colonies. The middle colonies were characterized by a high degree of religious, ethnic, and economic diversity. Their fertile soil made them an important exporter of wheat and other grains. At the same time, thanks to abundant forest resources, lumber processing and shipbuilding developed vigorously in the middle colonies. The textile and iron industries in Pennsylvania also achieved considerable development. The rise of these industries, together with deep estuaries and river resources, led to the emergence of important ports such as New York and Philadelphia. The New England colonies had rocky terrain, and their soil was far less fertile than that of the southern and middle colonies. But the region had abundant natural resources, including highly valuable timber. Residents of New England mostly lived in fishing villages and agricultural communities. They were mainly small farmers, and their lives were relatively self-sufficient. Over time, they gradually concentrated more on handicrafts and trade. People traded only for goods they could not produce themselves. In addition, because New England was rich in marine resources, it became an important commercial center and shipbuilding center. It was not only a trade hub between Europe and the southern colonies, but also part of Britain's global trade network. New England also developed a triangular trade system. Molasses was first obtained from the Antilles and processed into rum. The rum was then used in Africa to exchange for black slaves. Finally, the enslaved people were sold to the Antilles and the southern colonies. At the beginning of the 18th century, slavery had replaced indentured servitude as the main source of agricultural labor on the cash crop plantations of southern North America. Although slavery was legal in all 13 British colonies, colonial society was divided over its religious and moral implications. Because the colonial population had a high birth rate, a low death rate, and stable settlements, the population of the North American colonies grew rapidly. In the 1740s, a religious movement known as the First Great Awakening arose. This movement not only strengthened the religious atmosphere of the colonies, but also inspired people's pursuit of religious freedom. Also in the 1740s, British colonies represented by the colony of Virginia began competing to buy indigenous land, because the British Crown insisted that land acquisition had to be carried out through legal purchase. In 1754, the French and Indian War broke out. The two sides in this war were the North American colonies under the British Empire and the colonies under the French Crown. Both sides were supported by several indigenous tribal allies. 2 years after the war began, Britain formally declared war on France, and the 7 Years' War began. In 1762, Spain joined the war by allying with France in order to invade Portugal, Britain's ally. However, this alliance ultimately ended in defeat. Spain ceded the port of Havana to Britain. The following year, under the Treaty of Paris, Spain ceded Florida to Britain in exchange for Britain's return of Havana. In the same Treaty of Paris, France ceded its colonies in what is now Canadian territory to Britain. Britain then established the province of Quebec there, which covered large areas of what is now the United States. France also ceded to Britain the part of Louisiana east of the Mississippi River as far as the mountains. The Louisiana region west of the Mississippi River, however, had been ceded to Spain under the secret Treaty of Fontainebleau signed by France and Spain the previous year. This war placed a heavy financial burden on the British Empire. In order to maintain the cost of stationing troops in the North American colonies, Britain began imposing a series of taxes on them. These included the Sugar Act of 1764, which prohibited the colonies from importing rum and imposed duties on all sugar imports not from the Antilles, and the Stamp Act of 1765, which required stamp duties on commercial documents, newspapers, books, and other items. Colonial residents strongly opposed these policies and launched many protests, eventually forcing Britain to repeal the Stamp Act. But in 1767, Britain passed another series of acts that imposed new taxes, once again arousing colonial resentment. Resistance was especially intense in the province of Massachusetts. In 1769, Spain launched the Portal Expedition. Led by Don Gaspar de Portal, the expedition set out from Baja California and became the first European expedition to reach what is now California by land. This expedition began Spain's colonization of the region. In the same year, the city of San Diego was established. To calm the unrest in Massachusetts, the British government sent troops to the colony, which ultimately led to the Boston Massacre in 1770. After the massacre, Britain repealed most of the taxes. But to symbolically maintain Parliament's right to tax the colonies, it kept the tax on tea. In 1773, in order to help the British East India Company, which was in financial difficulty, the British Parliament passed the Tea Act, granting the East India Company a monopoly over the tea trade in the North American colonies. This act triggered the Boston Tea Party. Protesters dumped all of the East India Company's tea into the sea. This event caused the conflict between the British colonies and the British Crown to escalate sharply. The British government immediately took retaliatory measures, closing the port of Boston and passing the Intolerable Acts, which abolished part of Massachusetts' autonomous privileges. In 1774, with the exception of the colony of Georgia, the other colonies sent representatives together in Philadelphia and established the First Continental Congress. Its purpose was to coordinate the colonies' resistance against the British Crown. After this, colonial residents who opposed Britain were called patriots, while those who remained loyal to the British Crown were called loyalists. The First Continental Congress passed the Continental Association, reaching an agreement among the colonies to jointly boycott British merchants. Through the peaceful means of not importing, not consuming, and not exporting British goods, they demanded that Britain repeal the Intolerable Acts. The British Parliament declared Massachusetts to be in a state of rebellion, restricted trade between the North American colonies and Britain's West Indian colonies, and prohibited ships from New England from fishing for cod in Newfoundland. The situation became even more tense, eventually leading to a struggle over control of military supply depots. On April 19, 1775, British troops were sent to the town of Concord with the aim of destroying local arms and arresting Patriot leaders. This action ultimately led to the battles of Lexington and Concord, and the American Revolutionary War officially broke out. The Second Continental Congress formally reorganized Patriot militias from various places into the Continental Army, and appointed George Washington as commander-in-chief. In 1776, statesman Thomas Jefferson drafted the United States Declaration of Independence. This declaration was based on Enlightenment thought and liberal ideas. Its full title was the Unanimous Declaration of the 13 United States of America. The declaration was drafted by the Committee of Five, Thomas Jefferson representing Virginia, John Adams representing Massachusetts, Benjamin Franklin representing Pennsylvania, Roger Sherman representing Connecticut, and Robert Livingston representing New York. The declaration was adopted at the Second Continental Congress held in Philadelphia. It formally announced that the 13 colonies had become sovereign and independent states, no longer under British colonial rule. It also marked the formal legalization of the American Revolutionary War. In western North America, the Portal expedition reached San Francisco Bay, and the city of San Francisco was subsequently established. The following year, representatives from 28 towns gathered and declared separation from the British colonies, establishing a new government. During the War of Independence, the Continental Army and the British Army fought many battles. In October 1777, at the Battle of Saratoga, the colonial army defeated the British Army for the first time in a major victory. This victory greatly encouraged France and Spain, and the two countries then decided to form an alliance with the American revolutionaries. This alliance balanced the military and naval strength of Britain and America. The Battle of Saratoga is therefore regarded as one of the victories crucial to American independence. Beginning in 1778, the focus of the war shifted to the southern part of North America. At first, the British Army won several important victories in the South. For example, the Siege of Charleston in May 1780 was one of the most devastating defeats suffered by the Patriot forces during the Revolutionary War. 44 colonial residents and 4 new Spanish soldiers established the town of the Angels on the west coast of North America. This small town later developed into today's city of Los Angeles. In the same year, after a series of victories on the southern battlefield, the Patriot forces controlled most of Carolina and Georgia. Then, in the Battle of the Chesapeake on September 5 and the Siege of Yorktown on October 19, the British Army suffered successive defeats and finally sent envoys to discuss surrender. After 12 hours of negotiations, Britain and the United States signed the Treaty of Paris in 1783, and the American Revolutionary War officially ended. Britain gave up control of the Ohio River Valley and recognized that the western boundary of the United States extended to the Mississippi River. Florida was returned to Spain and was established as the southern boundary of U.S. territory. In 1787, the Ohio River Valley became the Northwest Territory. The Spanish established the Santa Cruz de Nootka outpost at Nootka Sound on what is now the western coast of Canada. This outpost controlled a large area of northwestern North America. Afterward, Spain detained several British merchant ships in the region, triggering the Nootka Crisis. Also in 1789, the Constitution of the United States of America was formally adopted. George Washington, the famous hero of the American Revolutionary War, became the first president of the United States. The following year, the U.S. Congress passed the Residence Act and decided to establish a national capital. In the same year, the city of Washington was established on land along the Potomac River donated by Virginia and Maryland. The city's official name was the District of Columbia. In 1790, in order to resolve the Nootka Crisis, it was agreed that the region would be jointly managed by Spain and Britain. In the same year, land west of North Carolina was ceded to the United States and became the Southwest Territory. In addition, 1790 also marked the beginning of the Second Great Awakening. This was a Protestant religious revival movement that spread religious faith through preaching and triggered a series of social reform movements. In 1791, Vermont joined the Union and became the 14th state of the United States. The following year, Kentucky County separated from Virginia and joined the Union, becoming the 15th state of the United States. In 1794, the Third Nootka Convention was signed. Spain and Britain agreed to give up control of the Nootka region. The following year, the two countries formally withdrew their forces from the area. In 1796, part of the Southwest Territory was separated to establish the state of Tennessee, which became the 16th state of the United States. In 1798, a piece of land within Georgia that had once been disputed by the United States and Spain became the Mississippi Territory. On November 17, 1800, during the administration of John Adams, the second President of the United States, the U.S. Congress held its first meeting in the city of Washington. Washington officially became the capital of the United States of America. This was how the United States came into being. The American Revolutionary War opened the way for the development of capitalism in North America. But problems that existed in society at the time, such as slavery, also brought long-term challenges to the future development of this new nation. This history also shows us that every historical process unfolds within the specific background of its own era. In the next episode, we will learn about America's westward expansion, as well as one of the most important events in American history, the American Civil War.